Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Lackéus, and I'm a researcher at Chalmers University of Technology. I will start with a little bit of a background on what we are working with in this project, and it's called Value Creation as Pedagogy. And we have been applying this in 3 countries. And but before we tell you how that has worked out, I'm going to give you a little background on this way of working. So this, what I'm going to present now, is written down in my thesis, PhD thesis. This project has been about infusing entrepreneurship into education. And when you do that, it's good to have a definition of what we mean by entrepreneurship when we try to infuse it into education. And I've been using a definition that views entrepreneurship as creating value for someone else. So what kind of value are we then talking about when we talk about creating value? It could, of course, be economical value that we have here, but there are some other kinds of value that are also important when you work entrepreneurially. And they are especially important when we are talking about infusing entrepreneurship into education. It is actually really fun to do something for someone else. We can also see that there is a social value in helping other people. There is also an influence value. We humans, we like when something we do stays after maybe, you know, we're all going to die someday, you know. Sorry to break it to you, but that's the situation. So we want something to stay, something that we were responsible for. We want to make an influence in the world. That's also a value. And we also want harmony, not only for ourselves, but in our world. Harmony could be, for example, that we don't destroy our nature. That kind of harmony. But there are many kinds of harmony. And when we create value, it could be viewed as a dialogue between the individuals creating value and the new value that is being created, as you can see here. And this dialogue is not only resulting in new things, it is also resulting in something going from the value to the individual. The people that work in this way, they are changed. You develop as a person when you create something that is valuable for someone else. And this is the mechanism that we are using in this project. So when we ask somebody to, when I say student, I mean student on all levels of education. That's how they use the word in the United States. And I have an American supervisor, and I also think it's very practical to have one word for every time I want to say something about the people that are learning here. So this is the view that we are using. And there is also a broad view of entrepreneurship that is being used often when we talk about entrepreneurship in education. And you can see this here. We are talking about creating value instead of creating a new company, for example. So what we have done in this project doesn't have anything to do almost with creating companies. That is not what we are talking about here, mostly. And we can also see that value creation could be a first step into then later on in life taking the step to create a company, and that this company actually continues to exist so that it becomes a sustainable company. So value creation is the first steps into creating new things, we could say. So there is a progression here. We start with value, and then maybe if we really like to do something that is good for others, we maybe do it through a company. And maybe that company continues to exist. Let's see. So how do we make people more entrepreneurial? Well, there is only one thing that works, learning by doing. This is something we are pretty sure about. And then the question is, yes, and John Dewey was the researcher or philosopher behind the idea of learning by doing. He actually never used that term himself, which is a bit funny because every time you say learning by doing and ask where did that come from, everybody says John Dewey. But that's not the term that he used. Anyway, we use it and we attribute it to him. But the question then is we have to have an answer to is learning by doing what? And this is a question that we have surprisingly little information about, even today, 100 years later, after Dewey wrote his famous book about democracy and education. We still don't have good answers to the question learning by doing what? Which is a bit funny, strange. And Dewey himself also wrote that when we work in a different way in education, we get new problems, which we have to solve. And it's actually more difficult to do it in this way than to do the traditional patterns of education, where you lecture and you have a test. That is the easiest way to perform education. And students actually need more guidance rather than less guidance. Some people say that, oh, they are working with this learning by doing, and then we can let them do it themselves and we don't have to guide them. And that's not how it works. And Dewey wrote about this almost 100 years ago. And still people are misunderstanding this. Isn't it strange? We never seem to learn, do we? So what do we need to do? Well, we then have a situation where we have something called progressive education, which is about teamwork, problem solving, learning in a social setting, and so on. So we have progressive education, and then we have traditional education, which is about lecturing, memorizing, teaching to be able to manage a test. That is called traditional education. And we have a lot of this is like an eternal battle between two very different ideas of how to educate people. And this has been going on before Dewey started talking about. He called it the new education, and he compared it to the old education. But this is something that has been going on ever since. And even this year in Sweden, we have articles in the newspaper proposing that we should do traditional education. And then we have debate articles proposing that we should more do progressive education. Some people use these terms, but most people don't. So still today, we haven't solved this problem of progressive versus traditional education. So actually, when I was at ABF Vux, you were there, weren't you? Yeah. And I asked, what about teacher education? What do they teach in teacher education? And the teacher said, they teach this. They teach progressive education. And then when we come out into the real world, this is what we have to do. And I was like, how can that be? Maybe that was just one person saying that, so maybe that's not. Well, you want to say something here?
I agree with both of them because we taught as a traditional system as a teacher, so we teach in the classroom in a traditional way mostly, and then parents also accept some traditional thing because they are taught in a traditional way. So parents expect like that. If you give more homework and if you do something more for students, you are a good teacher for them. Yeah, you have to give homework, you have to do a lot of practice maybe. So we don't have chance to make a flexible education in the classroom.
So we have politicians, we have PISA measures standing on the left side, we have researchers, we have teachers standing on the right side. Simplification, of course, but this is what you see when you read about these things. I'm not the one stating this. This you can find in a lot of places, that this is the situation. So what do? We go back to Dewey. What does Dewey say? Dewey says, the solution of this problem requires a well thought out philosophy. Okay, we need a philosophy. What kind of philosophies do we have to choose from? Well, we have problem-based learning, we have project-based learning, we have service learning, and we have another one, entrepreneurial learning. But what is entrepreneurial? Nobody knows, you know. So let's look at these different kinds of learning. They all seem to be about something in line with working on problems. And we all want to see some authentic content. Some of these philosophies are about teamwork. Some, at least one perhaps, project-based learning is about creating artifacts, creating something tangible that you can, you know, give to somebody, a product or something like that, or a service. It could be an intellectual artifact. Some of them are about working over time. And then when we look at entrepreneurial learning, we have some more things coming up here. We are then talking about real-world interaction, which also could be in some of the others. Creating something of value for others, working with opportunities, working iteratively, which is, you know, repetitively, do the same thing multiple times. Normally when you do things multiple times, we think it's a failure. Because if you have to do it twice, you didn't do it so well the first time. That's what we normally think. But what if we should do it that way? What if it's wrong to not do it a second and a third and a fourth time? Novelty and failure. So we see that entrepreneurial ways of thinking and acting can bring something new on a philosophical level to education. So this, I've called this learning through. And this is something we talked a lot about. Learning by doing. Learning through doing what? Yeah, we have a problem here. So if we then add creating value for others, learning through creating value for others, we have the 6 words that it took me 7 years to come up with in my research. And I wonder, do you think I've been productive? 7 years, 6 words. Not so much, perhaps. But it's 6 really, you know, well thought through words. And this is what we've been trying here in this project. So why would learning through creating value for others be something that could help in education? Well, what I've seen is that when we let students experience emotional events, something happens with them. And if we do activities that trigger these events, and it could be working in teams, it could be experiencing something that is uncertain, it could be interacting with the outside world, it could be helping others, that's often quite emotional. It could be overcoming a knowledge gap, presenting to others. When we do that, we see that it leads to developed entrepreneurial competencies. And what are the entrepreneurial competencies? Self-insight, uncertainty tolerance, self-efficacy, perseverance, marketing skills, social skills. So this is what we've seen in this research, and this is what we've also been trying and testing in this project to see. When we do the things we have done in this project, what kinds of emotional events do we see, and what kind of learning do we see? And then we ask the students, what have you learned from doing this emotional event here? And they can articulate, and then we try to interpret that. That is how we have been working in this study, in this project. We see some strong links in general, and Karin will tell you about the links we have seen in this particular project. When you work in teams, you build up your self-insight. When you interact with the outside world, you build up your self-efficacy, self-confidence. Here we can see that value creation is an unexplored middle way. We often talk about doing creative things in school. We often talk about creating a venture. We have young enterprise in Sweden, which is the absolutely most common thing that people in school get to do. But we very seldom work in this middle section here, value creation. And this is something we have been trying in this project to see what happens when we ask students to work in this way. And we also have been applying a new assessment strategy. So what we can see is that trying to measure the developed entrepreneurial competencies is quite difficult. And it's not so easy to assess students based on entrepreneurial competencies. So do you feel self-confidence? Great, you get a high grade. Oh, so you don't feel self-confident? You get a low grade. We cannot work that way. It's not possible. This is another assessment strategy, to actually measure the events themselves. Then we have to trust that the events lead to the developed competencies, which is not an easy thing. But it's at least better than not measuring at all, because we have a risk in society. We risk focusing on what is easy to measure, instead of trying to measure what we actually value. And this is words by Gert Bjesta, who is a fantastic professor that I'm very inspired by. And I say it again because it's so good. We tend to value what we can measure easily instead of trying to measure what we really value. This is a big problem in society. So we have to find new ways to measure what we actually really, really value, like young people's growth. That is what we have been trying to do in this project. Entrepreneurial assessment is the title, isn't it? And based on this work, I've been trying to define value creation pedagogy. And this is the long version. This is not the 6-word version. This is the maybe 20-word version or something. Let students learn by applying their existing and future competencies to create something preferably novel of value to at least one external stakeholder outside their group, outside their class, or even outside their school. That is what we have been trying to do in this project, to work like that in schools with our students. So what happens when you do that? Let's go back to the traditional versus progressive education, the centuries-long battle. And let's add another axis on this. Let's add classroom education down here and experiential education up here. So experiential education is basically working out in the field. As soon as you open the door to the classroom and go outside and go out in the field, we are doing what some people call experiential education. Of course, you have experiences in the classroom too, but this is this is a field of how to work. And why people want us to work this way is that it leads to emotional exposure, which then leads to learning of a different kind. And then we have classroom education. We seldom talk about classroom education. It's the most common way to teach, but still we seldom talk about it. It's so practical to be in a classroom. You have everybody in front of you. You know, you can see who learns what. As soon as you go outside, you lose some of that control. So classroom education is also an important thing in education. So I call this the philosophical playing field of education. So you could view this as a football field almost. And we start down here and ask the question, for whom could this knowledge be valuable today? We are in the classroom, we are really more towards the traditional side. And then we let students learn by applying competencies. So we go and get the competencies on the traditional education side. Then we go to the progressive side, create something preferably novel. And then we go outside, of value to at least one external stakeholder outside their own group, class, or school, university. And then we go down to the classroom again. How did it feel? What do we know now? For whom was this knowledge valuable today? So value creation as pedagogy is not about choosing between traditional or progressive education. It is about a rhythm. It is about how to move between different philosophical positions. And this is what teachers have known all the time. That you cannot just use one kind of philosophy. You have to use different ones. You have to go down to theory, and then we try to apply it, and so on. But this has been done not guided by something like this, a philosophical guidance. So maybe that is something that this could contribute with. Yeah. And this is how we have seen that this could bridge. through entrepreneurship, we can simplify this process of working in this way. Because entrepreneurship has a lot of tools and methods that we can actually use when we work in this way. We get students to take responsibility towards something and someone else than themselves. So that's a bridge between individual and social. We make them start in the content. So this is the content. This is the information we have. What can we do with this? For whom could this be knowledge? This knowledge be valuable? So it's a way to create effects based on knowledge. So we are not leaving traditional education. We are starting in traditional education, and then we are going outside. And we can assess the emotional events, which is a way to bridge between detached and engaged. And ultimately, it's about applying our knowledge in practice, going from theory to practice and back to theory. This is the kind of constant back and forth that we have to have in education for it to be working really well. This is really difficult, so we need the support that entrepreneurship can give us. And I put up something that I call the altruistic paradox based on this. So we get more motivated by creating value for others in 15 minutes than by creating value for ourselves in 15 years. And based on this, it's better to ask our students, for whom is this knowledge valuable today, than to say, you will have use for this in your future. So we have some examples of this. We have in the room here some of the examples. So we've been looking at this way of working on all levels of education, from 4 years old to adults, and also even beyond adults almost. And here we have children helping architects to develop a new building in northern Sweden. You see, maybe it's difficult to see, but this is a normal, vest. So they are pretty small, these children. They proposed that the house should be rainbow colored. Yeah, of course. I mean, why don't we adults come up with an idea like that? It would be wonderful. Here we have our fantastic kids in Istanbul. We have their teachers and other colleagues here today. And on the upper level here, which is down here, we have, for example, students from Gothenburg that we have worked in this way. And that's where we got the idea of exploring this from the start. We looked at what we were doing at Chalmers, and we asked ourselves, why do our students get so engaged? Why do they get so motivated by doing this? Is it because they get to start a company? Well, maybe. But we found out that the reason they got so motivated and they learned so much was because they were doing something that could be valuable for someone else. That was the reason. So we have taken that concept and tried it on all levels of education. And it seems to work in a way that has, surprised us all. So we have a lot of quotes. We are collecting enormous amounts of data on this way of working. How many interviews have we done, Karin? Total? Yeah. In this study? No, in total, yeah. So it's thousands of pages of information coming from students, asking them. And we have chosen to ask the students what they think. And if they tell us that they learn things in interesting ways, and that these things that they learn are interesting, then we go talk to the teacher. I was told by an education researcher that you cannot trust students in terms of collecting data. Isn't that strange that they say that? Yeah, exactly. So we have this. We adults. You will be adults as well one day. We have this problem with adults. There was this word that I saw in the flow. They called it. Sorry, this is a Swedish word. Vuxlingar. It's a way to look down upon adults, because adults don't trust young people. They don't believe that young people can do things, and that is the kind of system we have. based on our view of young people as what they can do and what they cannot do. And that disturbs me a lot. A lot. But we can do something about that in this project, so it's fantastic to be here. So I'm almost, yeah. So as a method to collect data, we have been using an app-based system. And this has been applied in all of these schools in this project. And while this app is, of course, very interesting, it is not the main reason why we are here today. Yes?
How do you handle all this data?
How we handle it?
Yeah.
We drown in it. We have much more data than we have resources to analyze it. And that is because this is an you could say this is an undercover research project. This was not supposed to be a big research project. It started like, you know, so it's not done in the typical way that, you know, we get 10 million and then we do research for that. It doesn't work that way. Every month we try to get the resources we need to get to the next month. That's how this research is done. We have developed a tool to be able to make sense of all the data we have, which is basically 8 different dimensions that are important to keep into account when you work in this way. We want to have interaction with the outside world. We want value to be created, or at least attempted to be created. We want students to work in teams over time. We want them to own the process. We want them to encourage failures. We want them to connect to knowledge, subject matter. We want the process to be iterative, and we want them to get activity-based feedback. We want to assess the activities, what they do, rather than the resulting knowledge. And we have used a form where teachers could design their own ways of working in this project. And I've seen some of the forms. They are fantastic. Yes? No? Okay. I thought you raised your hand, but no. So, and then we also have an entrepreneurial toolbox of a number of different tools. I don't know to what extent we have actually used this toolbox in these schools. And because it's not so easy to just go and use these tools. They are not adapted to education. They are built for entrepreneurs, these tools. But one day, we will be able to adapt these tools and this toolbox to the needs of teachers. I've been asked to write a book about this, and if I would do that, I would write it together with teachers. So, but I don't know to what extent we have been using it. It's a potential for the future to adapt these tools to educational settings that I believe very much in. So that's about it, and about the background. And now, when you have listened to things that some of you already knew a lot about, let's go to the interesting stuff. What have we actually found when we have been doing this study or this project?
Small, but
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you for contribution and hard work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we will have a fika, and we'll be back at 11, so hope to see you then.